Hello, CFA candidates. I just want to share some preparation tips that have been proven to be very effective in the past as you yourself prepare for the upcoming exams. So, in my opinion, here's the ideal preparation schedule over the next few weeks. So, between now and T-minus 8 weeks, so 8 weeks before your exam, you should be really focusing on making summary notes for each LOS. I'm a big believer in making summary notes for things that I want to retain. Now, when I make summary notes, here's the benefits that I get, and a lot of my former candidates have said the same thing. The exercise of summarizing a concept will help you better understand the material. In fact, it'll force you to understand the material. See, it's one thing reading something, it's another thing writing it down. So when you go through that transition from reading it and then translating into a few of your own words, it actually forces you to understand the material. And that's exactly what you want. That's the only way you're going to clear the CFA program, is if you have a deep-rooted understanding of the material. And summary notes will do that for you. The other thing with making summary notes is that it'll increase your retention through muscle memory. Once again, there's a big difference between reading something and writing it down. When I'm writing something down, you could see that there's muscle movement, and that actually helps the material register better in your mind. And this way you'll be able to retain it for a longer period, and that's exactly what you want heading into the exam. Because one of the biggest things that candidates say heading into the exam is, they say that, oh, I think I'm forgetting everything. Well, you know, if you write it down, it'll come to you much easier than if you had just read it alone. Now, the backup plan, in case you run out of time, in other words, with 8 weeks to go before your exam, if you don't have all your summary notes done, then you could just use our guides instead of making your own summary notes. So what this says is you making your summary notes is really the best source that you can have heading into the final leg of the exam. But if you run out of time, like, this is a very realistic prep program. We know that some candidates, whether it's through their own actions or actions beyond their control, they'll simply run out of time. So there's 8 weeks to go, and they may have like a few chapters that they haven't made summary notes for. What I'm saying is you can use our guides. In fact, when you do make summary notes, I recommend that you use our guides, and I'll show you where to find all that material. Now, what's the one thing that you should avoid during this phase? Again, between now and 8 weeks to go to the exam. So during that phase, here's one thing you don't want to get bogged down on, and that's practice questions. Because if you start doing practice questions now, here's what's going to happen. A lot of candidates have run out of time. So let's just say there's 60 chapters to go through. So if they're taking their time, i.e. make a summary note for a chapter and then do the questions before moving on to the next chapter, a lot of them don't even make it through all the chapters that are required because they simply run out of time. And the other thing is, if you do questions this early, you will likely forget anything you learned from doing that practice question. So you know how when you do a practice question, you pick up something, you pick up a little something, like instead of a plus, you should have done a minus or whatever, or you forgot to make a modification here or there. These are little things you pick up by doing questions, but those lessons don't stay for long. So if you do questions this early, come exam time, it's like you have to reinvent the wheel all over again. So again, from experience, right now is not the time to do practice questions. Practice questions will become our biggest focus in the final 8 weeks heading into the exam. And I'll dive into that in a second. But first of all, I want to show you what reference you can use in order to make your summary notes. So here we go. So I'm just going on our website here, and I'm just going to be using our level 2 platform just for illustration, but you can use it's the same format for level 1, level 2, and level 3. And you can see, first of all, at the very top here, we have our LOS checklist. So I strongly recommend that you download this checklist because it shows you all the LOSs that you need to know. And remember, every exam question is based on an LOS. So this checklist is a great way for you to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. i.e. every LOS is accounted for. So that's the first thing I recommend that you have in your possession. But then you can see we have modules for all the chapters in the curriculum. So what I've done is, so here's the CFA curriculum, right? So we've taken that and we said, okay, what is examinable? And how do we know what's examinable? Again, it's the LOS statements. So we use the LOS statements as guidance for us to decipher what's examinable and what is unlikely to be examined. So all that's included in our study guides. It's right there. So at the beginning of each chapter module, you'll see that study guide. But then you see each LOS line item. And for a lot of these, we have videos. So if there's some elaboration required, I've made a video explaining in detail what all the steps are. So you'll find the content not only in the study guide, but you can view the video to accompany as you go through the study guide. So that really is your best source for making summary notes. Now at the end of each chapter, I've assigned a set of questions, again from the curriculum. You have to remember the importance of that, ladies and gentlemen. These aren't Q-Bank questions. These are questions directly from the curriculum. Why am I making a big deal out of this? Because the CFA Institute has made it very clear that their exam will be based on questions from the curriculum. So why not master the same source of questions that the examiners are looking at right now in formulating your exam? So that's our philosophy. So going back to our game plan here. Now, when you get to 8 weeks before your exam, hopefully the ideal situation is you've got summary notes for all the LOSs. And I showed you the checklist, and it's got a checkbox that you can just tick for every LOS that you have made a summary note for. Ideally, that's where you want to be with 8 weeks to go before the exam. But like I said, if you don't have summary notes for all the chapters, then stop making summary notes and just use our guides, because our guides themselves are summary notes. Those are my summaries of what's in the curriculum. So when I say you make your summary notes, you're making a summary of my summary notes. So the summarization process stops with 8 weeks to go, because then our focus turns into practice questions. So the way I recommend you tackle the practice questions is as follows. Review your summary note for a chapter, and then attempt the high priority questions that we have assigned for that chapter. So let's stop right there. I have not assigned all the questions from the curriculum. I use a concept which I refer to as return on time. What does that mean? Well, I always ask myself, for the same hour that a candidate is doing one question, how many more points can that candidate get by doing these other set of questions? So I don't just say do all the questions. I pick the high priority questions that I think will maximize the amount of points you'll accrue for every hour you put into this. Because again, it's a very practical course. I know your time is limited. Even if you had all the time in the world, I know your capacity is limited because we're humans. So I can't just dump everything on your plate, right? We have to pick the best ones. Just like if you're constructing a portfolio, you don't just pick every stock. You have to do your research and say, oh, I think these stocks have a lot more potential, so I'll include them in my portfolio. It's the exact same mentality. In the investment world, you call it return on investment. Here, we call it return on time, and you have to maximize both returns. So that's how I pick the questions from the curriculum. And here it is. So they are either directly related to an LOS or bite-sized enough to be tested during the CFA exam. Some of you have probably seen those blue box questions. Some of those examples run for 3-4 pages, and there's very little value. So all that data to come up with just very little value. You know, you could use that same amount of time that you spent doing that 4-page example. You could have done a whole host of other questions and got a lot more points during the CFA exam. So that's the way we gotta think. Now, repeat this cycle for every chapter. So, review your notes for a chapter and then do the assigned questions for that chapter. And just very quickly again, ladies and gentlemen, here it is. So when you click on practice questions, there's assigned questions at the end of each chapter. Do those questions after reviewing your notes for all the LOSs for that chapter, and then you move on to the next chapter. So you review all the notes you have for all these LOS line items, and then at the bottom of that chapter, you can do the questions assigned for that chapter. So you really want to make that connection between the concepts which are included in these LOS notes and those practice questions. So by doing them one after the other, i.e. review and then practice questions, everything just falls into place. Now, what's the other benefit of leaving all the practice questions towards the final 8-week phase? By continuously concentrating on practice questions in this last leg of your prep, you will build up an incredible momentum heading into the exam. And that's the difference with doing practice questions early on and then closer to the exam. So again, I'm not saying don't do practice questions. I'm just saying that the timing for the practice questions has to be right. And that's why I don't encourage doing practice questions early on in your prep, because it's too soon. But when you leave that whole block of questions towards the end and you continuously do these questions, you start becoming more efficient because you're not being interrupted in between. In other words, you're not doing practice questions for a chapter and then you have to read another chapter. No. You've got all your notes at this point. Now you just have to go through the entire questions from the curriculum. So you become more efficient because you're doing it continuously. And like I said, you develop momentum. Now, within that phase, we're going to look at mock exams, of course, because that's practice questions as well. Now, for the mock exam, I recommend that you do the mock exam no earlier than 3 weeks before exam day. So when I was a candidate, I did it a week before, and here's why. A mock exam is all-encompassing. So I wanted to make sure that I've mastered all the high-priority questions from the curriculum, and then I did the mock. Had I done the mock too soon, then of course I'm not ready, right? Because I probably haven't done all the assigned questions. So again, with mock, try to leave it within this window, i.e. Sometime 3 weeks before the exam, but no earlier than that. Remember, you have to peak at just the right time. So if you're doing mocks prematurely, you may peak too soon. And then by the time the exam time comes around, you're rolling down at the other side of the hill. And you don't want that, right? Okay, now the final week. What's in the final week? Final week, one word summarizes it all: reinforcement. And during this week, what you want to do is you want to redo previously attempted questions that you may have initially flagged. So one standing rule that we have is you never get bogged down. If you're stuck on a question, just flag it and move on to the next one. So in this final week, that's your opportunity to revisit those questions and have that last crack at it. And the other thing is, these flagged questions, obviously they're challenge questions. That's why you flagged them. And that's going to give you a great workout heading into the exam. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found these beneficial, and we'll talk again soon.